Hello everyone. In this video I will be going over how to do the typography project with an example, and I'll be working with Illustrator for this. Now if you're working with Illustrator, make sure to focus just on how I'm doing things in this video, because Photoshop and Photopea instructions are a lot different in some aspects. So the first thing we need to do is go to the Start menu and locate Adobe Illustrator, and there we go. So once it opens, we will be basically creating a new artboard, and it is open, never mind. We'll be creating a new artboard, and so if you didn't have Illustrator open and you it just now popped up, it's going to have the home screen. If in my case it isn't, then you'll go to File, New. But you can just go to Create New here. And once you get in there, we need to change points over here to pixels and set the dimensions for that, which we are doing something the size of your screen, which should be about 1920 by 1080. And let's not forget to call this Typography Project. And then we want one artboard. It's going to be landscape. Our dimensions already set that. Don't worry about bleed. For color, this is something that could be used on a screen, and that's what we're going to mainly be working with here, is something that might be a wallpaper. So change CMYK to RGB. And your raster effects, we can change that to screen, which is 72 ppi. Pixels per inch. And then default for the preview mode, and when we click create, give it a second, and boom, there we go. Now the next thing I would urge you to do, because this is pretty much how I work and I think it's the most efficient way, is to make sure you have Window, Workspace, Essentials, Classic checked, and that way you have this options bar across the top. Now I'm going to reset mine because I want it to look as much like yours as possible, and it looks like I already do have it that way. So first things first, in Illustrator you don't really have a background. Like, you have an area to work with, but if I were to save this, anything that is white here would be transparent. So for instance, like in a GIF file where the background has been made transparent, or in a PNG file. But what we're going to do is create a background, so I'm going to do that with the rectangle tool and just draw it across my artboard. And I don't need a stroke on that. I mean, I can if I want to make a frame or something that appears from the very edge, but what I'm going to do instead is just pick some sort of color from here, and you're going to want something that's not super intense, like this blue. So what I'm going to do is hold down the shift while I'm clicking on there, and that'll give me a color picker where I can lighten things a little bit. So if I wanted to go with like a lighter blue, I could. Now you can also do a texture if you want to figure out on your own how to do that. I can show you at some point, but for the purposes of this project, I would stick with what you do know, and if you are really set on something more advanced, by all means I can talk with you and show you how to do that. You can also do a gradient here, which I'm going to go ahead and click on the gradient, and as you can see, it defaults to that white to black gradient. And so I'm going to go back to my blue here by double clicking on that stop, and if you ever just have a grayscale, we can swap it over to RGB here. And so I'll have my starting color as that light blue color, and my other one as something a little bit darker, or I shouldn't say darker, more saturated. And I also want to switch to a radial gradient, which is going to give me the ability to kind of have things lighter in the middle and get kind of more saturated as they go out. So when you're doing that, you can do that through the gradient tab over here. You can choose radial or linear or freeform. So there's a few different things you can pick from here. And I can stretch this out too and make it so that it goes a little bit more gradual across the whole thing. So I got my background, and if I'm working in layers over here in Illustrator, layers are not full screen things. It's just literally I can add an object and it will list it under that layer, so I can have multiple objects within one layer. But I want to lock this layer because I don't want it to do anything while I'm working with the text. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, and then on here, if you click on the if you click on your other layer and then go down to where it says lock other layers, if I can find it. There you go, lock others. It'll put a lock in there, or you can alternately just click the lock button. So I have that locked, but I'm on layer 2 now, and I want to use the text tool. And this is how we're going to do the how you're going to add your quote in, of course. So when I click, it's going to give me some placeholder text. I'm going to make it as big as I can so I can see it all. And I want to think about what font I want. And you don't want to do anything too crazy. Something that's easy to read, but it can be a nice, interesting font of some sort. But I want to choose something that goes kind of with my quote. So I'm going to start off with something more traditional. Now, if you don't have a font that works for you and you want to do something different, you can, I'm going to go with this typewriter one. You can go to, here we go. You can go to dafont.com and you can find a font that you want, and you can hit the download button. And when you hit that download button, it should bring it down there. I just opened up this unique font for the purposes of showing you. So when you download it and it appears down there, if you open it up, you double click on the font and click install, and it should show up in your list. Now I already have this one installed, I believe, so I don't need it. But anyways, if I go back into Illustrator now, I'm using this typewriter font just because I feel like for the contrast I'm going to show in certain words, that works best. And through the magic of I've already done this project 2 times for the other 2 videos, I already have a quote picked, and you should have one from your typography assignment, and you should also know who wrote it if it's not anonymous. And if it is anonymous, you can include the word anonymous in yours. But I'm going to go ahead and click in here, highlight, and go Control V to paste it. And you can see it's doing everything in my font. And right now I'm going to stick with black, but I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, put my insertion point in, and hit enter in a few of these spaces in here. And the Alan Watts here, I'm going to put a little hyphen in front, and I'm going to highlight Alan Watts and make him a little bit smaller, because I don't necessarily want this to have more importance than the rest of the quote. The quote's the most important part. I also want to kind of put some size here. I want to make this a little bit bigger. So if you click on the select tool up here and click on the corners, you can stretch out, and shift will allow you to do it more proportionally. So proportionately, whatever. But you know, I could keep it like this, but it just doesn't have the impact that I want it to. So I'm going to kind of center and see what happens. Now, centering can look okay, but it can also look boring, so just keep that in mind. I want to make certain words stand out, and there's a few ways I can do that in Illustrator. I can change the font, which is one thing I want to do, because we got kind of a typewriter font, but I want to make this look futuristic. I want to make it kind of more bold, so I'm going to find something that's more of a modern or a futuristic looking font. I want it to be lowercase to fit with everything. Looking, and again, depending on what your words are and what you want to communicate through your thing, through your project, you can kind of adjust that. You can choose a font that's appropriate to what that is. I'm going to actually also I'm going to highlight the word. I'm going to do the same thing with that word, living. So what I want to do is match that style. And that was Nissan Opti. So I'm going to make this Nissan Opti. So I got future can be made by those who have no capacity for a living. So we got these two words. I can also change the color. So if I highlight it there, I can go into the characters panel here, choose something that makes it really stand out. Now it stands out, but it's kind of weird against that blue, so I want to pick something or do an effect that's a little bit bolder, or that makes it stand out more. So what I have right now is this kind of yellowy orange color, but I can do something different with that. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here. Pick the same color, and you can add a stroke, for instance, and in this case I could just add a black stroke and it'll make it kind of pop more from the background. It kind of, whatever they call it, delineates the space. And I can also do the same thing here, and I like it okay, but normally I would make text that I want to make it, if I want to make it stand out, I might make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit and make this a little bit bigger too. And we'll create kind of some unity here, so I'll make sure this is 132 as well, since the other one was. And the other thing I want to do is I want to kind of space things out a little bit better. Now, sometimes it's best to keep it like left aligned, and then you can bring your whole thing over, bring all your text over, and you can kind of stagger it a little bit, and that gives it kind of a nice little effect. I'm gonna actually put the word the next to future in here because I think it works better. No valid plans for the future can be made by those. I'll just make this go to the next line, and I'm going to space it over. Made by, or maybe I'll make this 4 go on the next line, stagger it a little bit, and can would go on the next line, and that way that kind of stands out a little bit more. Made by those who have no capacity for living now. So you could do, you can kind of move things around, see how they look. The ultimate idea here is that you are creating some sort of visual balance in here. And as I'm looking at this, I don't know that I like it the way it's spaced out, so I can adjust it. And then I'm going to go back with what I had. By those who have no capacity. And the more I look at it, the more I think it might look better centered. So scrap that idea. I'm going to bring it back over, and I'm going to have to adjust some spacing again because I took out all that. Now, centered sometimes looks good, sometimes it doesn't. But in our case, in this case, I think it looks better if it's centered. And so I'm going to bring this back over. The other thing I might do is change the leading here, because if you look at it, it looks really spaced out, and I kind of want it to, the actual quote to be a little closer together. So I'm going to go to Window, Type, and Character, and that should bring up the same thing that you would get in Photoshop, where you can adjust the leading and the tracking and all that stuff. Now, I don't want it to overlap so much over here, so I might have to play a little bit with kerning. So I want my spacing to be a little bit smaller, but I'm going to go ahead and mess with the kerning on this. So if I actually, in this case, I'll do the tracking for the words so it spaces out everything evenly. But I need to stick in between the T and the U, which are kind of close together, a little bit more space. So I'm just going to bring that over. I'll try to do it here too, because I want it kind of to be equal. And I also want to put a little bit more space between the and future. There you go. Whoops. And it doesn't seem to like that. I can put a space in that way. Now they're not overlapping. I might do the same here. There we go. Well, that's kind of a big space, so I might change that right in here and bring that, the size of the text down, but I can change the kerning and the tracking on this. That's probably going to be my best bet. And if I do that using the tracking to start and then go back in and adjust using kerning, you'll see it's very subtle. And maybe in this case I could actually bring the kerning down. I could change the spacing a little bit on the word capacity. And so as you can see, you have kind of different concerns depending on what your text is when you're working with Illustrator. Alright, so I don't know. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch things out a little bit here. So this is something you might do as well, where you can right click and go create outlines, and that kind of changes your text into objects that can kind of be moved. So I can double click on a certain letter here, and I can actually use my cursor keys to move it. And I can take the word capacity and kind of move it over a little bit that way. Whoops. Whoops. And in some cases, if your letters have holes in them, they might appear a little differently, as you can see. There you go. And that way we're not dealing with a gadzooks, which is when you take two characters and they're touching. You don't necessarily want that. Sometimes you do. But there we go. That's a little bit more spaced out. And now if I double click to get out of this isolation mode, now you can see, okay, I got my quote here. I want to do a little effect here, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Effect, Stylize, Drop Shadow. And that way it kind of stands up off the screen a little bit. Click OK on that. And the text here, okay, so maybe I don't want it to be that dark, so I'm going to go back and I want Control Z to undo. And I'm going to go back to stylize, drop shadow, and I'm going to adjust the opacity. I'm going to make it more like 50%. And when I click OK, now it's a little lighter, it's a little bit easier to read. Now as I sit back and look at this, I realize that there are some lines, that aspects of this that I might want to adjust here, like the spacing of these two lines. So what I did was I used the direct select tool so I could select just a part of these, and I'm bringing them a little closer. And what this will also do is space out the quote from the author of the quote. So, you know, if you tweak things a little bit as you're working with them, that kind of can help you to, you know, make some like minor adjustments that allow you to kind of achieve more of a visual balance here. So there we go. Now I got this in here. Another thing I might do is take the word future here. I'm holding down shift while I click on each of the letters here and go edit, copy. I'm going to go back out of this and go edit, paste. There we go. So we have a copy of it. And I'm going to look and see what happens if I do a 3D extrude and bevel on that. So I could do something like this if I wanted, and I could adjust the depth a little bit. Just give it a little bit something more to stand out. So if you wanted to go that route, you could. For mine, I don't know that I like that. I just wanted to demonstrate it. It might work for what you're doing. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to keep it the way it was. I like this, and that's how I want it. So now what I want to do is export it. So if you go File, and then Export, or not Export, sorry, I want to save this. So if you go File, Save As, and then it should default to Typography Project. Save it in your documents, and that's it. You just need to click OK on the next thing that pops up and upload it to Classroom, and you are done with the project. So that's the Typography Project in Illustrator.